Welcome to Top Shot, the program in which we try to bring a personality who talks to us about his experiences, share his knowledge about what he thinks the India should be and how are we really moving. I am very happy to welcome in our studio today Mr. Sunil Mittal, the chairman of Bharti Group, who have really made us proud, not just by bringing different technologies into India, by popularizing telecommunication network all over the country, but also because he is now holding the Indian flag high, not just in India but all over the world. He just received an award from Fortune magazine as the Businessman of the Year, the magazine which is so reputed. I am very happy to welcome him here. Welcome Mr. Sunil Mittal amongst us, and very happy to know that you have been doing everything every day which really makes us proud. How do you manage this great feat of doing so many things so many times, at the same time doing so successfully? Every day we read that you have done something different. How do you manage this?
Well, I think as an entrepreneur, one is trained to multitask, and right from my young age, I have trained myself to ensure that I'm covering a lot of ground on a daily basis. Today, Bharti is in the news all the time because of the work that we are doing, mainly in the telecom sector, and now in some of the other sunrise industries like retail, agriculture and life insurance.
You know, of course, we are all really very happy that India has finally started moving ahead, because for a long time we are thinking that other countries can move ahead and India can just watch them happening, at the most analyze why they are doing it. But today we are doing it ourselves. How do you attribute this success that Indians and India as a country has been able to attain?
Well, as they say, success feeds on success. Last 15 odd years, I think for India has been a true turnaround story. And ever since 92 first generation reforms were introduced, I think many new entrepreneurial drives have come through, and they have been wonderful examples, whether it was Bharti or the IT sector with Infosys, Wipro, TCS, Jet Airways, Z Telefilms. A lot of new entrepreneurial energy has come through the last 15 years. And now you are seeing many more, hundreds of new examples coming up. Then you look at the economy. The economy has been moving at a fairly fast clip. This year we may cross 9.5%. That's a fantastic growth path for such a large economy. And I think that gives the confidence to a nation, to its people, to go and take a major position in the world stage.
Yeah, but you just mentioned a few companies who are doing well in your sector, CIT sector, or it's in information technology sector, or in aviation. All these three are service sector, and our today's economy, more than 50% comes from services.
Sure.
You think it's a sustainable model when manufacturing is not picking up as much as it should be, or in terms of GDP, of course, it is less than a quarter, and agriculture is very small. Is it a sustainable model?
Well, I think India has been for a long period of time having a very large proportion of its economy in the services sector, and you are very right that in the last 15 years of success, service industry has played a bigger role. In fact, we are now touching 60% of the economy in the services sector. My view is, yes, it is sustainable. Having said that, I must say that manufacturing is also doing very well. For about a 10-year period, we saw a flight of manufacturing from India to China, and it was China repeating its successes in manufacturing. But India has now come out in the manufacturing area as well, especially automobile parts, small equipments, small and medium enterprises, machine tools. Successes are coming through now. But I would say the story in services sector will remain robust, because given the India's young profile, you will have a lot of working hands and minds which will continue to drive the service economy, whether it's in the financial services, telecommunications, IT, now in the biotech and other areas. Service industry will become a major source of strength for India.
Yeah, but you know, look at it like this. By definition, services has to service some sector.
Sure.
So if the manufacturing and agriculture do not grow enough, then the services on standalone basis cannot just keep on growing indefinitely unless these two sectors also keep growing simultaneously. So that's something which really worries some of us, and we feel that we need to do something about it.
No, rightly so. I mean, no nation can purely be on one or the other. Thankfully, we have large sections of our people engaged in all three segments of the society. While services industry contributes 60%, it doesn't necessarily employ 60% people. In fact, agriculture has about 600 million people living on agriculture, and there the growth rates have been quite slow. although we were delighted to see Planning Commission's report which suggested that we may have breached the 3.5% barrier on agriculture growth, which is good news.
Yeah.
But if agriculture can move to 4.5%, I think the whole nation can benefit. So I agree with you that there's got to be equal importance given to each of the segments of economy, but we should not necessarily get worried if the services are doing well.
Yeah. Basically, our problem now seems to be that while the rest of the world looks at India as a country of future, in India, if you really look inwards, then there seems to be a lot of contradictions which are now coming to fore.
Sure.
There are 160 districts out of 600 looks to be Naxalite infected, and so far that also was below the surface. But now you're seeing that trains getting hijacked, police getting fired at, schools getting now becoming the place for the militants to stay. So is it something which now the rest of the world looking at India is a real India, or what we see within India is a real India?
I think you raised a very valid point, and our Prime Minister also at the CI AGM itself spoke about this, and in fact shared his concern that there is an issue around inclusive growth, and we can't just have excellence of centers of excellence of growth in urban areas or big cities. This needs to now go and impact the rural population as well. The rise of Naxalite movements or rise of distress in villages and some of the districts that you have mentioned clearly suggests that we are not reaching out as fast as we should. One view from an entrepreneurial point I can take is this is government's job to go and ensure that there is peace and harmony around the country, to ensure there are employment opportunities in these backward areas, and more importantly invest in infrastructure in these areas. But I think that today's business leaders are clearly realizing that we need to shoulder some of the burden, and companies like Bharti are now going out and doing a lot of stuff in the rural areas. You'll be pleased to know that currently we are covering 60% of India's population with telecom services. This will go to 85% next year and 95% the year after, which means practically the whole country will be covered, and this includes all these districts that you spoke about.
This is a remarkable feat. In fact, what we have been able to do is, that's what I was saying, that we really make us proud. This brings us to a very interesting point. You mentioned that now the private sector wants to get into areas where the state should be doing more. We had a debate in 60s and 70s that state went into areas where the private sector should have done something. Now you are trying to talk about exactly the opposite of that by saying we would like to go and try to do something where the state has failed to do something. Now, is it the right balance that we really need to strike? Because role of state itself needs to be redefined in this changing atmosphere. But is it also mean to say that you are trying to say is that we should redefine the role of private sector into this whole process?
No, I don't think so. Private sector will be able to substitute the role of a state, the might of a state, the resources of a state, the huge authority that a state derives from being a state. That cannot be substituted. All we are suggesting is that there may be now a time where private sector enterprises will need to understand the pain of this nation.
Yeah.
And if it needs to make this billion people its consumers and customers, they need to be its employees and be part of the ecosystem, then we need to understand and appreciate that. So, for example, if the government is coming out with policies to go and industrialize some of the backward areas, develop SEZs and things like that, private sector should actively participate in these programs.
Yeah.
To your first point, I am a strong believer the state must get out of all areas where private sector enterprise has succeeded, or where commercial enterprises have now flourished. Take the case of public sector telecom service providers. There are fierce competition in the marketplace, and I think today we have come to a point where we can be bold and brave enough to say that an entity like BSNL can be divested 15, 20, 25% of it, and that money that comes out, which will be billions of dollars, could then be redeployed into the nation in development of infrastructure in backward areas, for example. So government must get out of the areas where it doesn't need to be anymore and redirect those resources into areas where private sector can only have a periphery role. I don't think so private sector can have a central core role in developing infrastructure in the backward areas.
Yeah, in fact, that's right. And we'll come back to this telecommunication a little later. But just on this point of redefining the roles, I think somewhere we have seen the failure of the state in running enterprises, commercial activity. But now that was something which had a solution, because we had a very efficient private sector which is now taking over and doing a much better job. But the state has some core functions to perform. They must maintain law and order, they must make sure that development takes place. But very worrying that state is failing in discharge of those core responsibilities and core duties of the state. So, the failure of the state will also have a spin-off effect on the private sector as a country as a whole. So, how do you make sure that the state doesn't fail?
No, without a doubt. I mean, as I said, if a state fails, the nation fails, and we are a part of the nation. So, the success of our state is absolutely essential. And I'm very confident that when we are seeing a flourishing state, I mean, India is today flourishing as a whole with such a large growth, the impact and the good effects of that will be seen even in the distressed areas that we spoke about. But unfortunately, it takes time. Whether it's infrastructure, employment opportunities, they take time. The government may have to decide as a state to go and inject some direct benefits into these areas in the form of subsidies, directed focused subsidies, for example, and infrastructure development in these areas. And I entirely agree with you. The private sector can only be as successful as the flourishing of the state, because policies, the overarching umbrella cover to any enterprise in the country will depend on how well the state provides that to him. We can actually conclude that since the economy is growing very well, the state is doing a fantastic job. Yeah. And there are pockets of distress, and I can share with you there are pockets of distress even in the Western world, yes, but they are much less as compared to India.
One of the things where we see a very evident role of the state having not done something which they should have is in infrastructure. China is always compared with India, obviously, and China, we see that infrastructure of world class. They have created infrastructure for the next 50 years, not just for today, and we are trying to plan now what could have been done 50 years earlier. So that's a difference between India and China. Now, infrastructure, when you go to China, for example, somebody was saying that day that if you go to China, you see that China is growing. If you come to India, growth can be seen only in the pink papers, then only because around you don't see it. So how do you tackle this and crack this infrastructure problem?
I think this is an area of concern. First, let's see the good news. For last 7 or 8 years, the government has truly been focused onto infrastructure. So every successive budget has had massive allocation towards more infrastructure. Infrastructure seems to be heavy on the minds of our policy and decision makers. Finally, we have a number which says India will need $490 billion. That's a very large number in the short period of time in the next several years to build India's infrastructure.
8% of GDP is what is what.
So I think the intent is solid now. The policy makers want to push this part. The execution on the ground is mediocre, and planning, to my mind, is poor. So let me give you an example. Even today, what we are building out in terms of our highways, which is a great project, the Golden Quadrilateral project which is going on, or let's take the case of Delhi, Gurgaon or Haryana highway. I think we are building it for 10 years. We are not building it for 50 years. Yeah. That worries me. Our incremental approach continues in this country.
Absolutely.
When we were a country of shortages, incremental approach perhaps would have been the right thing because we had less resources. Today, when the country has the resources, we need to have long-term planning, 50-year planning. Yeah. And there are some silver linings. I think the Delhi airport is a classic example, which is being built for 50 years now. Yeah. We need many more large, big projects on LTP, long-term planning basis, which will take care of the nation for 50 years.
So I guess problem of vision, because we were brought up on a thinking that probably don't spread too much. Try to first find out what you mean, then they do it. This is probably the problem of vision. But what also is a matter of concern, as you said, is absolutely right, that we can pour resources into the infrastructure today because the economy is growing. It's already crossed the $1 trillion benchmark. But the country as a whole has some other problem which probably we have glossed over. One is a fiscal deficit. Country has more than 8% fiscal deficit, because if you add to it the state electricity boards and everything else, it's more than that. We have current account deficit, and now to top it all, now we have even revenue deficit and current account deficit also. So when you want to put money into this, how do you actually will have to give role to private sector to do this in a significant way, because governments will not be able to do it. Then the question comes of user charges, and we have this mindset of not paying for what we are going to use. How do you get over this problem?
Well, there will be a multitude of, I think, approaches. I am not overtly worried about the deficits, because nations, when they are building themselves, will have deficits, so long as they are not alarming. And in the current situation, I would say it's alarming. The tax
as long as the deficit is for capital expenditure, that's good enough.
That's what I'm coming. As long as we are not frittering it away on our operating expenditure of running administration, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
And tax collections is robust. Money is coming from outside is terrific. We have now coming close to $300 billion of foreign reserves. So I think there the government can be a little relaxed about it. Having said that, I think $490 billion is not going to come from the government alone.
Yeah.
Foreign monies have to pour in, private sector participation will have to come in, long-term debts from bodies like World Bank, IFC, ADBs and all will have to come in. So there will be, I would say, access to many areas of funds into this. And people are ready to put money. I mean, you took at the real estate sector now, they are putting in a lot of money. Look at telecom this year, I think telecom will put in about $10 billion. And no money is coming from the government, practically none from the government in that case.
More than what we put probably in last 25 years of first.
That's right. So I think money for infrastructure will come in because people know the infrastructure usage charges norms are getting well. The returns on these large projects are going to be okay. So long as you can demonstrate commercial angles to infrastructure development, it's not an issue. Therefore, real estate, telecommunications, even electricity, energy and all, you can see money pouring in now. So I don't think so money will be an issue. But yes, PPP is the best model, not only from money point of view, but from two other parts, implementation and planning. This will improve.
One of the problems of the government, again, besides infrastructure, is ability to deliver. The present government started saying that they need to reform the administrative setup, but we don't see much of it now. So because it's like creating a nuclear bomb within your own country, but not having a nuclear bomb carrier within the country. So the administration is like a carrier. So if you try to make a reform in the form of a bomb, but not have a carrier which will reach the target group, we are going to be doomed. So how do you actually address this administrative reforms issue in India? Because that seems to be a very key to success of many of these programs.
Well, my view is a little mixed on this. To some extent, I agree with you. We need significant administrative reforms. Many times you feel you are being over-governed. Many times you feel there are overlaps. There are plethora of engagements with the government and administration on single issues. But equally you see some parts of administration has now awakened and they are intervening into the society, into the industry, economy in a very significantly contributing way. Some parts of government therefore have been able to move forward, but parts not. And I would say the score of the central government is significantly higher here. Yeah. But as you go down the food chain, if you look at the state governments, then municipalities, then you see major reforms are required there.
Yeah. But this is why this reform on administration is because on one hand, after the 73rd and the 74th amendment to the constitution, we are trying to give more and more powers to the lower government. And what we are seeing here as a paradox is that the central government is pro-reform, the state government is not as enthusiastic, and lower below there is nothing known as reform. And we are giving more powers without attendant changes in that process. So is this not something which is concern you as a businessman? Or
I think it's a good point. Empowerment is important. I mean, I think every pundit of the world will say empower more, don't keep too many powers to yourself, whether it's running a business or running a country. To that extent, therefore, it's good to devolve powers to states and states devolving into municipalities and local administrations. But the point is the mindset change, the education at that level is really required. I can tell you that the people, when they go and touch themselves to the government machinery at the lowest level, they find too many obstacles. Every time they show them why it cannot be done rather than how it should be done. That change as a culture, as a character in the whole country needs to be brought about. But usurping all those powers back into the center will also not yield any results.
I think how not to do it is a new know-how we have developed within the country, and unfortunately we can't export it because nobody wants to take it outside. But coming to the issue of telecommunication, other sectors, we'll just talk to you. We'll take a short break. Don't go back. We'll come back very quickly. Thank you. Welcome back to our edition of Top Shot, in which today we have Mr. Sunil Mittal talking to us about various issues, and we'll continue our discussion. Mr. Mittal, we are talking about government's role, and we are talking about many issues. India is 1.1 billion now and going to be 1.6 billion or 1.8 billion by 2050. So it seems too many people. But do you find right type of people for the job that you have in your companies and your other new sector that you're opening up?
Well, I think this is a true paradox. And on one hand, we have now 630 million people, 63 crore people in our country in the working age.
Yeah.
This will, by 2016, which is 9 years from now, will get to about 830 million, 83 crore people. So on a simple basis, simple math, this should be a lot of workforce available in the country. So we should have enough supply of skilled labor and skilled managerial talent. But there is a mismatch. When you are going out to get people, whether it's in the IT, biotech, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, even basically skilled certified plumbers, electricians, carpenters, you're finding shortages. Today, construction industry is in a boom, but just to get simple masons who have basic skills, it's very hard to find. So I would tend to agree with you that there is a mismatch here.
Yeah.
And I must also give you another data point here. There are 280 million children in the age of 6 to 16. In 10 years' time, there will be 16 to 26. About 80% of those children will never go to a school.
Yeah.
Or if they go to school, they'll drop out in the first year or the second year. These children need to be skilled.
Yeah.
And the skilling program in this country really needs to be brought up.
Yeah.
We don't have skilled manpower in the country because we have no skilling areas. We have no skilling institutes, no vocational training. ITIs are not doing well. The government is trying to revive them. So there's a plethora of issues around this. The good news is the Prime Minister is deeply engaged with this process. He's deeply focused on this one. Tarun Das of CII is chairing skills mission, and we hope will come out with a very good report to follow.
But it's a failure of the education system, which probably we need to now focus on, along with the hard infrastructure. The soft infrastructure like education and healthcare is also one of a concern. Mr. Sunil Mittal, you wear too many hats right now. Of course, you are wearing none. One of the hats that you wear is of the president of CII, and in fact, that's the premier institute of representing the private sector in India. How do you see the role of private sector as an institution in some of the areas? For example, how do you see your role as contributing to environmental issues in India? Because private sector has a big role there because they contribute towards environmental degradation in a way. So how do you actually see a role of private sector to make sure that India remains green and not just prosperous?
I think it's a very good point. It's not only topical. I think only day before yesterday, the UN adopted the IPCC's climate change report. And while adopting, they have confirmed that there are serious repercussions of the massive consumption of the wealthy nations towards degradation of the environment. It's a cause of concern for all of us. CI in particular has been talking about triple bottom line for the last several years now. One part of that is sustainability.
Yeah.
And sustainability really means that when we develop the nation, we should not develop it for today or tomorrow. It should be developed for generations to come, which means we must ensure that environmental impact of all that we do in industry and in trade and commerce should have minimal impact on the environment. CI has a green center. It's propagating green buildings around the country. It has got 3 or 4 committees which are now looking into ensuring that environmental impacts are minimized. You will never be able to eliminate it. Now the main area would be actually your own area, is the energy area. India's energy requirements are going to go multifold in the next few years. How do you achieve those? If we don't have, for example, nuclear, we have issues there. We don't have enough alternate energy channels built up. That would mean we'll have to burn a lot of coal. And Indian coal has a high ash content, therefore a lot of pollution. That's an area of concern, and therefore clean coal technologies, nuclear power, alternate energy, all of that will have to play a role. But it's a big challenge, and a country which has over 1 billion people will end up consuming a lot more.
Yeah, so do you see a changing role for CII from just being a lobbying organization to lobby for policy changes with the government on behalf of its member to an organization which will look at possibly changing India's face completely, not just policies.
Yeah.
For example, energy mix, as you mentioned, or making sure that we actually develop right type of technologies. We provide a type of incubation capabilities for new technologies to come up. Do you see a different type of role like this for CII?
I think CII has already evolved much beyond now just being a lobbying organization. Thankfully, with the reform process, lobbying needs have become very minimal, and therefore organizations like CII had to morph themselves into an enabling organization rather than lobbying organization. Today, CII is actually having centers of excellence where they are imparting knowledge, quality movements, training, helping companies to develop green buildings, green factories, environmental issues, ensuring that the pollutants in the industry are controlled very well, and are actually imparting tremendous work in this area through events, seminars, direct interventions. So yes, CII today is an organization which is working alongside the government's agenda in these areas in a very big way.
That's very welcome news. In fact, one thing, there's a big debate in India today about reservation. We have a large section of India's population, because of variety of historical reasons, is actually today languishing. And one way to bring them up, as the government thinks, is to provide reservation for them. We have done that, I don't know how successfully, but in public sector. Now to introduce it in the private sector. So what are your views on that?
Well, fundamentally we are opposed to compromising meritocracy in any form. India has become competitive after a long time. We have suffered the rise of many other large tiger economies, China, and we have been left behind. But today, when India is now becoming competitive, I think it will not be appropriate for me to say private sector will accept compromising meritocracy. Therefore, reservations per se in the private sector should not happen. Having said that, I think the private sector has a role to play here. Affirmative action is the answer to this area. CII again has taken a lead role. In fact, we have given a code of conduct, many of our members have signed and more are signing in, to develop entrepreneurs from the SC/ST areas, scholarship in SC/ST area, higher education in SC/ST area, and finally employability more than employment, so that they become employable. I can tell you, and I say this with all honesty, there is no discrimination in the private sector against SC/ST. The catchment is small. We spoke about skilled workers or managers who can do the job. Unfortunately, the catchment of SC is very small. I employ a lot of people in Bihar, Northeast, West Bengal. I think without taking a roll call, we would have a lot of SC/ST candidates. You come down to Delhi, probably the numbers will be much lower.
Probably you will not even be asking them whether you belong to that category.
Yeah. Secondly, we don't take a roll call. In our canteens, when you go, people eat food at the same table. We don't ask who's SC/ST, and we want that atmosphere to remain. Having said that, I think we need to do something. Now, we have reached out to Ministry of Social Justice. I personally met Meeraji and asked her to give us a list of candidates who are engineers, who are graduates and don't have jobs in SC/ST. She has given me a list of 70. Those 70 are under training within Bharti now.
Oh.
And within the next few months, they will all be put into different parts of Bharti or our associates like Ericsson, Nokia, Siemens and all that. So we are doing what we can. More needs to be done. I cannot say that we are doing enough. It's a good start. And by I think we'll do more.
So I think you are going beyond rhetorics and saying that rather than just talking about sloganeering, we'll go into something good action. So I think that's something which hopefully will solve this real problem that we have, that part of a society is not just joining the mainstream. That's a very serious matter. Now coming to your great success that you are really made us proud of, and every Indian is really empowered because he's carrying a handset in his hand and now can talk to anybody all over the world at a cost which is impossible to even conceive a few years ago. Now, how did this happen in India? In fact, you are not from telecommunications sector. You are a first generation entrepreneur. You actually ventured into it. I know how much risk you would have taken at that time. But how do you think this success of telecommunications really happened in India?
Well, I think telecom, when I entered, in fact, I must say I was the first private sector person to enter telecommunications way back in 1982. When I brought India's first push button telephone and introduced them to the market, and that became a great success.